Hi students, Mr. Martinez here. Today I'm going to be covering the research topic of your science experiment. So first things first, why do we do research? First thing we want to do is make sure we learn what is already known about our topic. It also is going to help us to develop a hypothesis. So you may have learned, maybe in grade school that we often refer to a hypothesis as an educated guess. So where do we get that education from? Well, we get that education through the research that we conduct during our experiment. It also helps scientists in the real world to not repeat experiments that have already been done. So this is important because, as you guys know, that you're deep into your science experiment now. It's taken you a lot of time. You've done a lot of work, and in some cases, maybe you've even purchased some materials to complete your science experiment. So scientists in the real world don't want to lose time, and they don't want to waste materials if it is not necessary. So what else? Some things that I find when I research is that research can be really difficult, especially for students. So here's what makes it hard. You've got to sort through all kinds of stuff. So if you're on the internet and you type in a search, you get all kinds of results, and some of the stuff is relevant, some of it's important, some of it's not. So you have to sort through what makes sense and what doesn't. And that's not an easy thing to do, and it takes practice. Okay, so that brings me to my second point. Research is a skill. It's not something that you're just born knowing how to do. You have to practice at it, just like you might, practice math or any other subject or a sport. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So there's some key strategies out there, and I'll cover them in a little bit more detail as we move along. But one of those is to make sure you modify your search words. You got to know what your key words are. So you're always going to start with an investigation question. So you got to look at that question in detail and figure out what are the good words that I can search. And you also want to do a lot of skimming. So that means like you're not going to read everything that you come across. Okay, you're going to look for stuff by just kind of skimming it and browsing it to see if the information in those particular articles or books or magazines is useful for you in your experiment. On the positive note, research is not just reading. We often think of research as, getting our face in a book and sitting there for hours and hours, but that's not really always the case. We might do a lot of reading, but it's also videos. You can look at interviews, audio recordings, and obviously books or magazines as well. So I want the bulk of this video really to be focused on this. So how do we research? So as I mentioned before, you have to start with an investigation question. So our goal is to make sure that as we research, we're seeking out trusted sources. So I've also in class used the words credible sources. So that just means it's something that you can trust, or it's trustworthy, that the information you're getting from it is not going to contain falsehoods or lies, or it won't be inaccurate. So here's what I recommend is that you go to the school library. And I've covered this before, but we call it Gale in Context. And if you use this link or the link that I'll provide to you, we know that the articles that are within it are verified. So the material in there is accurate. It's been vetted. It's trustworthy. In addition, the positive is that the reading levels are, they've kind of been pared down, and they're meant for people of your age group. I want you guys to be aware of the standard Google search. So I know Google can be useful. I often start many of my searches on Google. But if you're using Google and Google alone, you might run into stuff that's not accurate, maybe some opinions out there. So it can be useful. You just got to make sure that whatever search results you get from Google are verified. Okay, so let's start doing some research, okay? So as I mentioned before, you have to start with an investigation question. So here's a question that I have, and this is a real scenario, and I came up with this question because in my home, sometimes I use Wi-Fi. Well, I do all the time. Sometimes I take my phone in the backyard, and I notice that as I get to a certain distance, my signal dies. So I was wondering, does raising the height of my router, okay, so the router is this little blue thing in the bottom left-hand corner. If I move that up, is that going to improve my Wi-Fi signal? In other words, can I walk a little bit further away from my house without losing signal? Okay, so this is my investigation question. So you're going to have your own for your science project or your science experiment, but that is the starting point for research. If you don't have one of those, you really can't proceed forward, okay? So in this experiment, I'm going to be, taking this router and moving it up, and I'll be walking away from my house with my phone and measuring the distance at which, my signal drops. So that's the basics of how I will conduct this. Okay. So that's my experimental design, but I'm not going to focus this video on that. The goal is to just know that I have this investigation question. So what do we do from here? So let's talk about how we do this. Okay, so remember, go to the school library. Let me go ahead and click that link. Okay, and as I go to this link, I want you to see that I want to keep track of my sources as I'm doing reading, and I'm going to ask myself as I go through these articles, how current is this article? We know the internet and technology changes, all the time. So if I run into an article that was written, in 2000 or 2010 or something like that, that's kind of old for the research I'm doing. Okay. And then I'm also going to ask myself, who wrote it? Are they reputable? If I'm doing research on space or about the planet Mars, and if I'm reading an article from NASA, that's probably a source that I can trust. But if I'm reading it from, Johnny's Instagram page, that is not a trusted source. Okay. And the last question I'll ask myself is, how relevant is the information? As I get to these articles, is the information fit the question that I'm trying to answer? So let's go ahead and conduct some research on Gale. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that link, okay? And it takes me straight here, and I've already logged in, and I've covered with you guys how to get into Gale in context with the proper passcode. So here's the first search result of the search that I did, okay? And this is really it's what you do not want to do. I've typed in my whole question. How does raising the height of my router improve signal strength? Okay, that's just way too many words. A better strategy is going to be to pick out the keywords in this question. So, maybe improve. I should have put Wi-Fi signal strength, right? So maybe Wi-Fi signal strength are some of those keywords, or improving Wi-Fi signal strength. We don't need to type in the whole entire question because we're either gathering too much stuff. So let's look at some of these search results that I've gotten here, right? So this one actually seems like a reasonable. Let me go ahead and show you this one. This seems like a reasonable article. How does Wi-Fi wireless device work? And one thing that I'm doing is reading these short little, paragraphs, or they're kind of summaries of what the article is about. So the first sentence here is, how have you ever wondered how Wi-Fi technology works? Well, yeah, I think that's what I'm wondering as part of my question. So I might browse that article. This is bringing up stuff about video games. This says lock and key. I'm not sure why that is in the search results. Biographies. This is about people, right? So really doesn't have anything to do with what I want. This is an audio file. Okay, magazine, staying connected. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in here, probably more, and it's not very specific to my topic. So I'm going to go ahead and modify my search result. And what I typed in was Wi-Fi signal. Okay, so still a lot of stuff. And let me just show you as I went through this. Okay, I literally, like I mentioned before, research is going to take time. So I clicked on that first article. How does a wireless device work? So I'm thinking this might be helpful for me because I want to ask and I want to find out if I can improve my Wi-Fi signal. So as I started reading this, it asks, how do you ever wonder how Wi-Fi technology works? Is it possible to stream videos, play games? And it goes on and on. And it starts to tell me that Wi-Fi has to do with radio waves, okay, much like cell phones. And as I went down a little bit further, it starts to detail out an experiment, okay? It's like a suggested experiment. So this is not really an article dedicated to educating me on that. It's kind of giving me an experiment, so not what I wanted. So I'm going to back up and go back to my search results and see if I can find a better article. Mobile technologies refers to a number of enabling technologies used for data processing. So once again, what I'm doing right now is skimming these words to see if I think that this article might apply to the question that I have. I've gone ahead and watched these videos already. This one's actually 14 minutes, and it had nothing to do with my topic. Okay. And as I went down a little bit further, these were some interviews. They were audio. I browsed some of these as well. And I kept, kind of clicking on all of them and trying to figure out if there was anything in here that could help me with my project. And not until I really got down a little bit further did I find something. So I went into the news article section and I was browsing each one of these. And I got to one just about here. This says boost Wi-Fi network in stay-at-home era. Okay. And let me go ahead and read this topic here. It says the name of the person, and USA Today. I know it's a newspaper. Okay, and this is a newspaper article, and it says the coronavirus pandemic has many students across the U.S. beginning the school year learning from home, possibly leading to crunch time for your home wireless network. Okay, so as I open this article, let me show you what I found. I started reading this, and as I got down to maybe like the fourth or fifth paragraph, it says, fortunately, you have a few methods of improving the speed, range, and overall performance of your home network. Okay. So there's several easy suggestions to follow. And so this section was really helpful as I started to read. Okay. And I've highlighted some more. And I got down to this section here. It said location, location, location. The next step is to ensure your router, which gives you your wireless internet, is in an optimal spot. That means a really good spot in your home. It says keep it on the main top floor and close to the center of the house. Refrain from keeping your router in the basement. Okay, if you have one, as it'll be tough for devices elsewhere to have in the home to communicate with it. Don't shove your router in a corner of the home, and make sure, here's where I put it in purple, make sure it's off the floor and on a desk or bookshelf. Okay, so that sentence alone and this paragraph is all very helpful information. I'm going to start to use this research to help myself form a hypothesis. Right now, I'm learning because the current location of my router in my home is actually on the floor in the corner of my house. So the recommendations from this person who wrote this article is that I should not have it on the floor. So as you can tell, I haven't written my hypothesis yet, but I'm starting to gain some information about where I should put the router and where I shouldn't. And maybe that's helping me decide whether I think, my signal is going to get better as I rate it, as I raise my router off the floor. Okay. So I mentioned before, I'd like you to start with Gale in context. This was a really useful article for me. Beyond that, I also went to a Google search. Let me cover what I did with that. So I typed in just Wi-Fi signal strength into Google, and actually I think I misspelled that, but it still came up with the right search results. And this first article says how to measure Wi-Fi signal strength on Windows. So you know what? I already had an idea of how I would conduct the experiment, and that was by using, the Wi-Fi signal on my phone. And I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe this can teach me a better way to measure it. So I thought this was useful as well. I clicked on this link and I went through. This says NetSpot, and as I started to read, it made me think maybe they're trying to sell something here. It says get NetSpot. So I had to be a little bit cautious about, what information I was getting from this website, right? So this is netspotapp.com. It's educating me a little bit on how to tell if I have a good or bad Wi-Fi signal and how to measure the strength. So once again, I'm spending time, I'm reading, I'm browsing material. And, at the end, it did say, hey, on Windows, which is what I have, how to measure it. Pretty much just look at the bars on your computer. This is telling you it's weak, it's fair, it's good. But I learned something from it. So this is something I could cite as well. And I'll just give you one more search that I did on Google. I typed in what affects Wi-Fi signal, okay? And this first article talked about the biggest factors which reduce Wi-Fi performance, okay? And this one talked about distance away from the router and as well as, internal walls in the house. So, I clicked on that one. There were some good pictures. Here the biggest factors reducing Wi-Fi performance are distance and internal walls. So that was also something that began to educate me on the subject. So bottom line is, as you do your research, you want to go through a variety of sources. Let me go ahead and go back to the Google form here. I used the school library. I did that in Gale. It's the first thing I did, and I found some good material. It took some time to browse through videos, go through articles, listen to some audio clips, but fortunately, I was able to find some quality information. On top of that, I used a Google search. I've warned you guys to kind of be cautious about that, but there is some useful information out there. And beyond that, I want to make sure we're keeping track of our sources. Let me just demonstrate to you in Gale, how easy that is. So when I did my search and I found my article, I think is the third link here, there's this little button here. It says Cite. And all I have to do is click the Cite button. And I'll just use APA format, for example. I can copy it there, or you can hit select and copy, and I can paste it into my science project section. And this is telling me exactly where it is that the article was retrieved from, and you're doing right by citing the sources. You're not taking credit for somebody else's work. Last thing I'll mention is I talked about questions I should ask myself. Is this who who's writing it? Well, this is USA Today. This is a newspaper. As well, this was published in 2020. So currently right now it's November of 2020, and this was August. So it's also, not something that is from, 10, 11 years ago. So it's a good source to use in our research project. Okay. All right. So let's recap a little bit. We asked ourselves, how current is the article, who's the authority, and how relevant was the information. If you look at that, Gale article was telling us exactly, where to put the router to get the best Wi-Fi signal. So what are you going to do with your research? Okay. So the goal with the research is to summarize what you learned from your research about your question. So, on your science project template, you're going to, pretty much write a quick summary of what you learned from your research, how it applies to your project, and cite your sources. Okay. So those are the two main points that I want you to get from it. And lastly, what did we learn? Man, I talked about so much. So I spent a little bit of time talking about why we research. So we definitely want background knowledge. I mentioned that a hypothesis is an educated guess. You can't properly form a hypothesis without doing some research. And we want to make sure we don't waste resources by repeating experiments that have been done in the past or that aren't necessary to do at this point. Okay. So how do we research? We need to start with that investigation question. Want to make sure we use trusted sources. My recommendation is to go to the school library and to use Gale, and that'll point you towards, reputable or trusted articles as well as good books or magazines. And you need to be aware of the Google search. Don't be afraid of it. Just be aware of it. Okay. Find stuff that is vetted. Don't just use random articles, or don't use stuff off random YouTube or Instagram or sources that are not credible. And then as you do your search, make sure you vary your words. You know and understand what your keywords. So go back to your initial investigation question, pick out the main words, and use those as part of your search terms. Okay. Don't forget to cite your sources, and always ask yourself, how current is the article? Who was the person that wrote it? And lastly, how relevant is the information? Does it actually apply to your topic? Okay. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions, please reach out. I will talk to you later. Thanks.